Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Man, it has been a busy week. We had more than 5, we had 7 lives scheduled. One more tomorrow. By the way, that'll be DJ Severe, the Dodgers DJ, talking about what it's been like to be the DJ in an empty stadium, the biggest stadium in Major League Baseball, with the best team in Major League Baseball, and what it's been like to figure out how to do his job when normally you've got 50,000 people knocking their heads. So he didn't have that. So tomorrow we'll be talking about that. But this intro is about today's episode. Now, we were going to have on Melanie Maythew, she's the CEO for Prelis Biologic. Now, what Prelis Bio does is they are trying to solve the puzzle of how do we print our own organs for ourselves. So your kidney, your liver, your skin, whatever it's going to be, putting together these highly complex organs. And how do you go through each step of the problem? How do you oxygenate multiple levels of cells? I mean, that's a hard problem already. And so we were going to have this conversation, but schedules are schedules. And so they had something come up and she had to postpone. So at the last minute, I call up Jon, Guerrero. Of course, you guys know Jon. And I say, hey, you want to fill an hour right now? And he said, yeah, of course. We love doing this. And I'm like, yeah, we do. So we didn't know what we were going to talk about. So we sort of gently start out talking about Prelis. And listen, let me make sure you guys understand this. There's no hard feelings at all with Prelis. I've already talked to Melanie. We're going to figure out a time that works because I want you guys to hear their story. It's changing the way, and then all of their cohorted companies that do similar things are changing the way we're going to see and do medicine. So it's definitely important to hear their message. We will get back to that. So anyhow, Jon and I start talking about the ethical things about living longer, 100 years, 130 years, 300 years, however long it's going to be. And what are the ethical things we have to do with that? And how do you keep your mind healthy for that long? And all these other things. What if you just want to be done? What if you had a hard life and you're like, stop saving my life? So we have this really impossible conversation about that. And that blends into the defund the police. And what is it like to be a police officer as a combat action guy? Like, what is it like to go to someone's door and not know what's on the other side? And then if someone shoots, what do you do? What's normal? I mean, that's a gunfight. Right. And so how do you respond in a gunfight situation? Not an easy conversation. And then that, of course, slides into the social justice aspect of this, the Black Lives Matter part. And we have a very challenging conversation. You have to understand, Jon and I have a lot of love for each other, and we have done a lot of things and been through a lot of trials and struggles together. So we can have these conversations in a way that a lot of people can't, because we're coming from a place of love. We're trying to understand, and you can hear us struggle with this as we try to deal with it. And you see us do this in the show. We've had on Michael Bianchi. We've had on just the other day, Daryl Anders wrote a song about, what the Black experience is. And next week, we're going to have Chris Thomas King on the show. He wrote a whole album of music about this. And so you can look at the academic side, but you also have to look at, the artistic side and the human side. And so we have this really hard conversation. I like to say it's unvarnished because we didn't pull punches. We were true. Unrehearsed because we were not ready at all. Like, we just went after this and we didn't know we were going to end up there. And then, undoubtedly essential. We can have these conversations. This is the thing. I'm not canceling Jon. Jon's not canceling me. Matter of fact, we're going to do more and more and more because we do care about this. We do care about how our society improves and evolves. And so I think you guys will enjoy this episode. It's challenging, and thus the long interview, or I should say it is a long interview. It's 90 minutes, but also the long intro, because this is an important topic and we all can take it. We all can stand up and say, you know what? Yeah, I can take this uncomfortable conversation, because whatever the answer is, it ain't comfortable. It's going to be hard. You're not going to get what you want. It's not going to be as easy as you want it to be. And most likely we don't figure it out for a long time. So don't worry about being on the right side of history. Get to work. That's my challenge to all of you. All right. Find what you care about. Be passionate about it. Get to work. I'm going to leave you alone after this. I'm going to say these words. Jon and Pete coming straight at you, midweek MASH style, on the Break It Down show.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, so this is Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show.
Yeah, no, not really. But this is Jon Leon Guerrero, co-host and race car driver of the Break It Down show.
We had Melanie from Prelis Bio scheduled to come on the show. Of course, she's the CEO trying to save the world. So we'll figure out, maybe she's running late. Maybe we'll have to reschedule. But, these things been, and so I, got the chance. Let's grab John for a quick catch-up show. So do you want to do the opening bumper, John?
Doing catch-up show with Pete on the fly here because we love doing these. And sometimes when you have a live environment, the world has other things in mind for your guest, and you have an opportunity just to catch up with everybody and see how everyone's doing.
Let me explain what Prelis Bio does and what Melanie and her crew are doing. They are working on 3D printing. They are working on 3D printing organs, things like kidneys, all kinds of things. And they've made a lot of progress. We had them on the Popping the Bubble show several years ago. And so they've had several years of advancement on their technology. She's like, I have so many things to talk to you about. But one of the things that we're learning about humans in general, and in the setup for the show, John, I put down, like, Melanie's going to save your life, and if not yours, someone in your immediate family.
Yeah, you don't know it yet, but
right,
it's gonna happen.
Well, most people, by like 90%, have some form of organ decomposition, organ failure. So
Sure.
maybe your kidneys still work, but at what percentage? Maybe your liver still works, but at what percentage?
Yeah.
And so we're going to find out that having these organs working well is going to turn into a healthier, fuller life. And this is just the tip of the spear with all this technology and how we're looking at medical things. So when I say she's literally going to save your life, they're going to be able to print your kidney, not just a kidney. It'll be your DNA, and you won't have to take antiretroviral drugs. You'll just be able to swap that thing in and have a kidney doing the work, or hopefully a pancreas, hopefully a heart. A lung transplant will be your lungs, and you won't have to wait any more than what it takes to print the organ, which is 3 to 4 months right now. I'm sure that'll get faster. But so that's what Prelis Biologic does, and we'll get Melanie on again. I'll bug her and figure out what happened, and we'll go forward. But
well, we can discuss some things about the topic, because I find it fascinating that they're taking proteins and your DNA and essentially producing an organ that your body will not reject.
Right. Yep.
There's the advantage. And so you're not injecting some kind of a foreign agent into your body. That's a great use of that technology. Now, let's say that we've created a situation where now we're able to eliminate, to a large degree, organ failure. What do you think is going to happen to the population?
That's one of my questions I always ask is how are we going to feed these people? Everybody, I mean, we're talking about global climate change, especially here in California, where we're going to make battery cars, the thing. We don't have enough electricity now. If people are living active lives into their 100, 110s, they're going to require a lot more air conditioning and electricity. I have got 1, 2, 3 USB batteries and my super powerful Jackery camping battery running this show right now, and I'm still taking power from the house for the big show lights that you can't see. Just think about that times another billion people.
Yeah, I saw something recently, crash course, and there was a crash course on energy, and the statistics that they quoted there, like one of them was, here's how many kilowatt hours per human being we consumed in whatever year, and let's say that was 50 years ago, and here's how many kilowatt hours we consume per human being in the United States now, and it was a crazy multiplier. So I don't recall what the numbers were, but they were, it was, we consume so much power now, more than we did not that long ago. And we have all these gadgets. So the thing is, are we capable of producing that kind of power? That's That's the question. And the other consideration, though, is when there was a point in history where, we went from everybody just being able to plant, and I'm talking about back in the Middle Ages at some point, maybe the 1400s. And if you lived in the middle of Europe back then, you could just, as long as you weren't bothering anybody else, there's a plot of land, nobody's using that, you could go ahead and plant something on it and then hope that just some, random grazing animal doesn't come by and eat your stuff. But it was free for you to do that. Then at some point, one of the kings decided he needed additional tax to collect. So he said, why don't we fence off all this property and I'll give it to one of these feudal, lords, and they'll take it over. And now you have a serfdom happening, and the feudal lord is now in charge of this land that you used to freely be able to plant on. So that seems like, man, that's bad. That's bad for the people. That's an injustice. But what ended up happening was it created order where people could say, okay, here you're doing rows of cabbage, and over here you're doing rows of corn, and you guys with the grazing animals, keep them over there. And so it hurt people's ability to be independent and make their own food, but it essentially was sort of like the equivalent to the first industrial revolution. It was the agricultural revolution.
Right.
And so it made it so that the same amount of land was producing a lot more food, and the opposite thing happened where we thought, oh no, all these serfs are going to be, now that they can't grow their own food freely, they're in trouble. But in fact, the opposite was true. They got organized and they were able to grow much more food, and then a lot fewer people were starving to death. So back to the original question. If we are going to experience less population attrition because we're able to keep people alive by printing organs for them, then what? Are we going to have the resources to keep people around?
Well, and so one of the questions we asked before on the show, with Sandra and I did the show, was the ethical consideration.
Yeah.
Yes, you can save this person's life. Is it ethical to do so? If you're 80 and you're like, my life has been filled with failure, yes, I want to continue to live because I'm afraid of dying, but God damn, like my life is horrible.
Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time.
Yeah, and if suicide goes through the roof because people are like, I just have to punch my own ticket now because I'm never going to die. Do you ethically create that harm? If we're mentally, a lot of us, not equipped. It's one thing to be born into that reality where you're going to live indefinitely because you can plan your life accordingly. I thought I'd be dead at 50.
Yeah.
So you have to get these two populations to work together on that. And I don't know, it's hard ethics are hard because it's not just doing the right thing, because all of these things that we can't even consider now that will be obvious later will come into play. And feeding people aside, where are they going to live? How do you provision folks who are, yes, you'll be able to get stem cells in your knee and fix your knee and get around, but we're not going backwards in time. We're not going to horses and buggies and that kind of thing. We're going to continue to go forward. So older and older people driving, and at some point, like, hey, my body works great, but my brain isn't great, but I still want to drive. All these things come into the fore when we're living to 110, 100. John, think about this. 50 years ago, dudes often died in their 50s because they drank too much, they smoked too much, and they ate crap food. We've eliminated a large majority of those problems where the things that, like that sudden heart attack, dead on the floor, hell, a lot of people survive that thing. And so what's killing us now? And then how do you get your brain and your mind to withstand the aging that you're putting it through? Because I don't know that the human mind is designed to go to 140 years.
Well, there's another issue, Okay, how about this? There's, let's say, the founding fathers, they, a timely topic. The founding fathers figured that if there was a Supreme Court that had justices on it who were appointed for the duration of their life, that would stem the court from being politicized. And so that sounds like a great idea. But what if you give this a thought? There is at some point in a couple years from now, it's going to be very common for the people on this court to be in their 90s.
Yeah.
And so they're taking to this court those mental faculties. What do you think? What do you think they would have said, or how would they have reacted?
Well, how about this? The court, okay, so there's a whole lot more people in the United States, including corporations, right? Because they're people too, than there were in the 1860s when we last set the court at 9 justices. So the capacity, there are more courts now than there were 150 years ago. So we do need more justices. And then, a mandatory retirement age is normal for anything else. So you could say this is a lifetime appointment as long as you quit by the time you're 75 or whatever it's going to be. And maybe they can go to 90. And this is in no way a knock on Justice Ginsburg, but you can't be falling asleep when the lawyers are arguing their cases, like you can't. That's not how you judge things. Yes, there's some pro forma things. They can always go back and read the notes and all that. They've got a staff, but you cannot fall asleep on the bench. Like it's just not a thing you can do. So
That's
what do
not
you
good.
do? How do you increase the capacity of the court, not to politicize it? And the other day we talked about this with Richard Lyons. We talked about, like, do you rank order judges based upon their history of decisions and put them onto a spectrum and just say, hey, a 7 died, a 7's going to be replaced, and take the politics out of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. That is a very interesting thought. So now, where do you? I don't know if we want to delve into this territory, but
Why not?
sure, let's do it. If we're going to preserve the lives of a greater number of people, assuming, and this is not a safe assumption, but I just want to interject this concept that the idea that we were to what am I trying to say here? Maybe if I talk about the framers of the Constitution, but there's also the population control component of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And if they were using faith 1,000 years ago to make sure that we had population growth by saying, hey, no birth control. Don't use birth control. We need these babies. We need these babies because you have 5 of them and 2 of them die before they're a year old. Yeah. So we need these babies. So now, if we don't need as many babies, where do you think the church stands on birth control? And is that an opinion you think will ever shift?
I mean, over time, maybe that shifts. It's a pretty significant hurdle, though. I mean, because it is in some cases, 1,500, 2,000-year-old belief.
Yeah.
And, those are things, there's a lot of things that fall into that aren't religious at all, that are just beliefs, that we do. So I don't know. It's birth control. Because we definitely don't need people having 10 kids all the time. Do you want to have 10 kids? Great. Here's what, as a community, as a society, we expect of you,
Yeah.
How about this? You have to have a license to have a gun. You have to have a license to drive a car. You have to have a license to cut someone's hair.
Yep.
But you do not have to have a license to make a human. Yeah. Uh-huh. You can't drink until you're 21. But you can have a kid. You can't drink at 21 because your brain doesn't work right. But you can have a kid.
Yep. Be responsible for a life.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're a barber, you have to take continuing education throughout your life. You don't ever have to take a continuing education class to have a kid.
No, you do not. Is that something that you are that you're proposing? We should have kid licenses.
I'm just saying that, and how about driving licenses? You don't get necessarily better as a driver. You get more experience, but if you're experiencing bad habits, like do you brake in a turn? That's bad. You shouldn't do that. You should enter the turn at a better speed. You
Yeah.
shouldn't brake. The car is turning because it unseats the car a little bit. But you're never required to take any kind of real improvement course. So there's a lot of things that you can't curl someone's hair without constantly validating that you know how to do it.
Yeah.
But you can have a kid, you can drive a 2,000-pound missile around carelessly, recklessly, distractedly.
Yeah.
So
you can drive and podcast at the same time.
exactly, yeah. And those are the things, like, okay, so should there be something for that? Should the government control that? The libertarian in me says not a chance, but if you're going to make the community absorb the cost, then now you have a different conversation, and I don't know what the answer is to that.
While we're on the subject, we're both fans of Jo Jorgensen, and I really do. I really do like her qualifications. I like her. She's just very personable, and I think she can. She displays leadership qualities that I enjoy. But what percentage of yourself would you say is your libertarian slant? Like, if you had to put a number on it, 1 to 10, how libertarian would you consider yourself?
I mean, as a person, I'm pretty libertarian. I want you to be able to do what you do. I want to be able to do what I want to do. And there's a difference in that it's not about what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like, live and let live. I'm going to let
Yep.
you live. So that's my default answer, and I
Yeah.
don't trust the government to get these things right, and
Okay.
if you don't require people to make good decisions for themselves, I would submit that a lot of the time they will make bad decisions. Like,
Yeah.
there has to be some accountability in your life. With that said, I don't want people to suffer. And if I saw a thing in the news with Berkeley is going to ban junk food sales at the point of purchase in stores. If you haven't figured out how to withstand that temptation of that chocolate covered marshmallow Rocky Road bar, as an adult, what can you handle?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But that said, if we're gonna all be paying for each other's health care,
Right.
motherfucker better quit eating rocky roads.
Yes. And if statistically it's been displayed that a lot of people are going to be eating rocky roads in spite of whether or not it's good judgment, then at some point what I'm going to ask the government to do is intervene before this guy keeps spending my money. So that begs the question. So if the 100% libertarian says, well, I don't care, that guy should be able to kill himself with rocky roads, and we shouldn't be doing anything about people having to go to the emergency room.
Yeah.
That's 100% libertarian. What percent are you?
I'm the part of me that's not libertarian is big enough that I'm an absolute hypocrite on most things. But I recognize that, So I would say, I don't know, am I 62% libertarian with a whole lot of liberal and a whole lot of conservative values? Probably. You know, maybe I'm 40, 40, and 40. And I know
Okay.
that's bad math, but I think there's over in that 40, 40, 40. I
Yeah.
disagree with
Yeah.
myself all the time.
Okay. Yes.
I saw
people point out
yeah.
that I disagree with myself. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Well, but I accept that I do, and I know that I don't have all the answers as well. I also know that from learning more and more about things, I make way more mistakes than I realize, where I'm wrong about something or whatever it is. Here's an illustration of disagreeing with myself. I'm walking in San Francisco, and I see two ladies in full burqas. Right, they're completely covered head to toe,
Okay.
and they have their male squire with them, and I get pissed because this is San Francisco. a place where like women's liberation is born, and freedom, is celebrated. And why in the world are these people doing this? And then I got mad at myself and I said, but they get to express religious freedom. And then I got mad and I said, yeah, but they don't need to be walked around town by a man because they're, so I had this conversation where I was pissed at myself and this back and forth as to what to do. And then I walked past him and I was like, I got to think about something else because I don't know what to do with that. But here's an absolute oppressive thing, but it's religious and it's in this city of freedom that also is very tolerant to, open drug use, right? Which is really uncomfortable for people. So
Yeah.
in the early teens, you could be a naked dude on Market Street if you were on the right part of Market Street barbecuing hot dogs until they're like, okay, you can't be naked because there's kids running around here.
Right.
So
yeah.
in a city where, within 5
And
years
you might
of that
accidentally barbecue the wrong hot dog.
time, wrong wiener on the grill.
God, I couldn't resist.
So, but
Yeah.
that's that hypocrisy that we all have internally, where we try to figure these things out. So the libertarian part of me, I understand that not everybody wants that. Not everybody wants the challenge of running your own independent life. But, who do you want to run your life for you? Like, who's going to be good enough at it?
Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily the expression of the I won't say anti-libertarian, but the expression of the other side, which is this: we need people to be scooped up and be able to go to the emergency room, and we need to take care of that because there are societal reasons and societal benefits from that.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody who's older, who's not doesn't have all their faculties about them, can fall down off the sidewalk, and you can take that person to the hospital and know that they're going to get treated and not left in the waiting room. That's the mark of an advanced society and the type of society I'd like to live in. Now, there's a bill for that.
Yep.
And somebody's got to pick up that bill. So if you want to be a collective part of that kind of society, how does that bill get paid? So, that's why it's a sliding scale. If somebody's 100% libertarian, honestly, much as I love Joe Jorgensen, and I just don't think 100% works.
Yeah.
I can't see that that's functionally feasible.
Well,
I don't think 0% works either.
There's things that you have to let somebody else do in society. We have in the Bay Area, you have 4 holes in the Caldecott tunnel area, right? And that, someone has to maintain that.
Yeah.
And
let's
lot.
refer to them as bores.
Bores. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can drive as far into the high Sierra as you want, and you're going to find paved roads. Someone has to do that
with the paved roads.
Right.
Somebody has to do that.
I'm never going to be on all the roads. It's impossible for a person, other than by like purposeful design, to travel on all of the roads that we all pay for in California because it's so massive of a state.
That's right.
So in some ways, the community has to say, I will never benefit from there being roads around Goose Lake. But it's important to me that we all contribute to all of these things so that we do have safe roads. I mean, how many thousands of miles of guardrail have gone up in our lifetimes where there was no center divide, there was no guardrail? It's hundreds of millions of dollars to do that.
Yeah.
So some of these things have to be taken care of by the collective.
So,
can I add a but?
40. Yeah.
Yeah, 40. But if
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
40. Yeah.
Yeah, 40. But if you're a police chief of a small town and you retire at the age of, let's say, 50, and you are going to make $150,000 for the rest of your life in retirement, that's not sustainable.
Right.
So, yeah. Like, I need you to go out and pave these roads. I'm desperate to have PG&E and the state work together to clear brush. But you know what it takes to take a dude, put him in a truck and say, go way the fuck over that way and clear all this brush.
Clear that brush.
Don't hurt yourself. Don't cause a fire. You know,
Do a good job.
Brakes, you know.
Yeah.
Whew, that is not easy work. That is,
And come back in 7.5 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you get in trouble, your cell phone may not work. So let's send you with another guy. Okay, fuck. Now we got a 2-man crew, you know?
It's this guy's job to hold the rope.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And a 2-man crew, let's face it, in this day and age, a 2-man crew is $2,000 a day.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to send them out, you're going to insure them, you're going to outfit them with gear, you're going to put hard hats on them, all that business. That's $2,000 a day. And
these are guys, you're unsupervised workers.
Right. And
have to
they
climb ladders.
don't. Yes.
Work around electricity.
Yeah. Okay. Electricity. How about wild animals? Because they're in remote locations. One of them might get bit by a snake.
Yeah.
You know, there's just all kinds of things. And so now you're talking about, wow, this is becoming a more and more expensive endeavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, the guy's out there trying to prevent a fire, but he's got a spinning metal blade and he's trimming grass. At some point, you're going to hit a rock. You know.
Right.
And,
Right.
and
It doesn't need to be obsidian.
Right.
It doesn't need to be flint.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
I heard something the other day about a farmer who was cutting his lawn, and his neighbors were going by, and you know, they'd say, "Hey man, you're not supposed to be cutting your lawn today. It's high fire day," and he'd tell them to go screw themselves. And then he started a fire. This happened. I want to say this happened in Oregon, and the fire ended up being, you know, some ungodly amount of money, $50 million to fight or whatever. But of course, they've got maximums on things like that, and so the maximum they could find this guy was $500. And so they fined him $500. That's, you know, it's a deterrent supposedly, but yeah, individuals, there are certain acts that individuals commit that are terrible for the rest of us that they can't pay for themselves. So we have to have a collective.
It's just, how do you control how expensive that collective gets? You know.
And when do you make adjustments? Because that's the other thing that we know is that, you know, good football teams make adjustments at halftime. And they come out and they play a different ball game in the second half than they played in the first half. That's just the right thing to do. So why isn't that the right thing to do in, you know, in a situation where your job is to make sure that society runs?
Yeah. And how do you prevent striving for mediocrity? You know, how government tends to do, where you're like, you just, I know of a guy that has worked for a very large governmental institution at the state level, but a huge one. And they reached a point in their career where they were more valuable outside of that work environment. And so that person sort of took a leave of absence and took another job.
Okay.
In the same field, but on the contract side, providing capacity to the state where it didn't have enough capacity. And he was making a lot more money.
We know a lot of guys like that. My dad.
And
a point in his career. Every civil servant will reach a point in their career.
Well, he went back to his civil servant job, and he's like, those guys, they work too hard over there. And he, you know, and it's not a knock on that guy. He took the right path for him. But and I'm not saying he's mediocre, but I am saying that when the job he had demanded what we would all call a regular amount of work, he was like, why am I doing this? I like that money,
back
but
to the government.
Yeah, exactly. I want my time back.
Yeah.
And God bless. I mean, do what you got to do. That's not a knock on any one person, but that is that striving for mediocrity that we get, you know. We want certain things. This is a thing I was having a conversation with someone the other day. We want certain things. We feel badly or good about certain things, but we don't act like we care. So, like, for example, if we're going to improve the police force, The police always want to get better. I mean, there's people, that's their profession. They get
Yes.
PhDs in that stuff.
Yes.
But you can't say, I don't want the police chief getting paid 150 grand and retiring at 50 and leaving. And I also want to increase the force by, say, 33% so that I can always have someone in training so they can always get better, because
Yeah.
that takes the cost of policing and it skyrockets. It's the same thing
That's
with
right.
healthcare. If you take everybody and you say, hey, we're going to have a completely modernized, state-of-the-art healthcare program, but everybody has to give up everything that they like about what they have now so we can rebuild this system from the floor up.
Mhm.
They are, and it's going to cost a lot of money, by the way. But we think
a
it's
tough
going to
sell.
work out better. We think,
it's a tough sell.
we hope. So everybody get in line who's in for this plan. How come there's nobody in line? Like, well, what about my pre-existing condition?
Yeah.
It's like, all
I
these.
know that police chief, by the way.
No, you don't. I mean, maybe you do, but no, you don't. But yeah, maybe you do.
I know the guy who made a lot of money as a police chief. He retired young enough that he's in great physical shape, and he's got at least, God willing, 50 years to go.
Right.
And I hope he makes it those 50 years. But my point in saying that was that when he became police chief of the small town where he was police chief, shortly after that, there was a murder. And it was the kind of murder that would make you statewide news, if not national news.
Okay.
And so he was immediately thrust into the spotlight where the saying or doing the wrong thing, and by the way, thrust into the spotlight while still having to actually perform the investigation on the job. Or, he wasn't the one performing the investigation, but he was the police chief. So he's in charge. And I guess the long and the short of it is that you want a guy who you're paying $150,000 at that point to be in charge of that, because that suddenly is a very big job. And it doesn't seem like, oh, this sleepy little town's never going to have why do we have such a, but the reality was that this guy had led an exemplary career. He actually became a lawyer. I'm giving away who he is for anybody who lives in our town.
Yeah.
He became a lawyer while he was a cop. And so he remained a cop, but went to law school, passed the bar, was admitted to the bar, and was actively, so everybody who says, hey, I know the law, copper, and here's what I say, that guy could legitimately say, I am also a lawyer, so don't press your luck. So, was that guy worth 150? Yes. He was absolutely worth 150. They handled the investigation beautifully. They managed the media landscape in that situation in that small town beautifully. Everything happened great. And then he retired at an age where he still had plenty of vitality left, and he's got a great life to look forward to, where they're going to have to pay him a lot of money every single year for hopefully many more years than he actually was a police officer.
Yes.
So, I think if we continue to train police officers, we get the better ones. If we make it so that we fight mediocrity systemically within the policing system by requiring, ongoing training, just like you do for a barber, except a little more because this guy's a cop, and barbers, have scissors in their hand. This guy's got a gun. So, but I think you make more valuable cops and you weed out the riffraff. What do you think?
I mean, it's great in that case. And when you say, I know that cop, there's 100,000 of those guys, 200,000 of those guys, and it's not always the case.
Right.
I will use an example from Vallejo, and I won't nail anybody down specifically, but a woman was kidnapped and raped repeatedly, and the Vallejo PD went on TV and said, "You are a liar." Those cops will retire, and they were wrong, by the way, on that, just so everybody knows. Those cops will retire, get paid, and they did like that. And I don't think anybody who has that happen wants to say, yeah, that person was a quality officer. So I mean, it's when it works out, maybe they're worth that much, but maybe a retired cop is worth 80 grand a year. Like, hey, thanks for your service.
Okay.
We're going to give you 80 grand a year.
All right. So is it the answer to say You're worth 80 grand a year. So significantly less than you made as a police officer, you're going to make in retirement. So make sure you pay all your stuff off now. Make sure you have a house free and clear, all that business, because
Right.
when you hit retirement age, you're going to be on a limited income and it's going to be much less. Or do you say, hey, we're going to need a few more years of service out of you? What's the right answer?
There isn't one. I mean, there isn't one. Because
Yeah.
along the way, I don't know
Well,
what.
no, there is one. We don't know how to get there. We
Oh,
don't
I
know
don't know
how
how
to
to get
get to
there.
the
Yeah.
answer,
Yeah.
but there is one. So the challenge is, how do we find what the answer is? Because somewhere in that equation, the equation that we have now worked for 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, this guy's going to be a great cop. He's going to put his life on the line. He deserves to get paid well. At the end of his career, he deserves comfort in his retirement. And by the way, he's going to die when he's 62.
Yeah.
And now people aren't dying when they're 62. So the formula doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So, yeah, how do
And
we adjust it?
And that cop, very likely in his career or her career, depending on who it is, runs up to a car fire, saves a life, serves a warrant at a door, and a gunfight breaks out, survives that. But a lot of those guys do get shot. They do inhale all of those fumes, and they do get cancer at 35, and they do like get medically retired early. And
Yeah.
again, like we as a society
Oh, we
have to
know a
look
bunch
at
of those
that.
guys too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very common to be medically retired or to retire and be like, and we have to give you this extra money for the compensation for your body. You know, these things get to be really expensive. And when you look at what it costs and the duration and that most lengthy retirements, I mean, yeah, you have to pay cops well. They have an impossible job, but we have to figure out, you know, what it is we expect of these guys. Because again, this isn't work we want to do. It's easy to say you should shoot someone, and you shoot, I shoot. You should shoot someone in the arm to disable them. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Right. Sure, that's viable.
if you stand still, I will shoot you in the arm. I can hit
Yeah.
that spot.
Stick your arm out, by the way. I need you to stick your arm out.
I will get there. But I'm
Hey,
running.
those people behind you off in the distance, get them out of there. Now stick your arm out.
Clear out. And don't be shooting
Yeah.
back at me when I'm trying to shoot you in the arm.
Right. Yeah.
These impossible situations we put these guys through, that also costs a lot of money. And there has to be, and this is not, we have to have, you know, we have to improve constantly how we police ourselves. But we also have to understand what it means to be in a crisis situation all the time and what that does to someone's psyche. You know, when your body hurts because you chased a guy over a fence, you didn't really get injured, but your body's beat up, you take a pill, you drink at night. You see the worst of humanity every day, day after day.
Humanity.
You know?
That takes a special kind of constitution. And so you want to attract the best talent.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we mentioned Jerry on the show pretty often, and Jerry's been my dear friend for decades. And we met in our 20s. We're in our 50s. So we've been friends for some 30 years. And we've been through a lot of things together where we saw each other every day. And sometimes he'll tell me a story about something that he encountered on the police force. Like, oh yeah, we found a dead guy in his house. You know, we did like a welfare check on somebody. Their neighbors hadn't seen him. The newspapers were piling up outside. And somebody said, hey, maybe we ought to take a look and see if Larry's okay. And so they had to force entry into Larry's house and found Larry, you know, sitting in his easy chair, but he had been decomposing for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's natural causes, or sometimes they had found somebody who had been murdered or whatever. And he will tell me these stories every once in a while, and it'll be one that he hasn't told me. And I go, wow, that's absolutely terrible. You know, that had to haunt you for a long, long time. I can't believe you never told me that story. And he'll say something like, yeah, you remember that day when we took so-and-so out for their, you know, we had a martial arts program. So we knew a lot of teenage boys. And when they reached their age of maturity, we would take them out for dinner. So a lot of 21st birthdays got celebrated. And sometimes he'll tell me, oh yeah, remember when we took so-and-so out for his 21st birthday? That was the day. It happened that day. And I was like, that absolutely horrendous occurrence took place, and I saw you that night.
Yeah.
And had no idea.
Think
And
about
so
this
how
too.
many things get bottled up,
Yeah.
by our veterans, our police officers, all the people who see the worst of humanity.
Yeah. We also know Speedy Cop.
Every
And
once in a
just-
while you tell me something and I go, Jesus, really? Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Speedy Cop was talking about Speedy Cop is a DC Park Police, which basically means he's the DC police force. And
Yep.
he was talking about what they were dealing with the riots. And I'll call them riots because there's protests and there's riots. They're definitely different things. And I'm like, how are you guys holding up? And he's like, well, several dozen people are in the hospital or have just been let out of the hospital. And these are cops.
Yeah.
Several dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're the next guy. You got to go back to work the next night when they're throwing frozen water bottles at you. And you're in combat. I mean, that's conflict. That's someone openly you're defending their right to do this. And you're the one that's going to pay the physical cost. And don't you dare lose your temper. Don't you dare overreact.
Can't do that. Nope.
Don't you dare have it look like you did those things.
Yeah.
That ain't easy work. And that's not what a demonstration is supposed to be. So you're putting people in the hospital. You're purposely trying to harm people by throwing bricks and shit at them. That costs money.
That's that guy's occupation.
Yeah. And again, this isn't about the ability to protest. It's about the ability to riot and what that costs for these cops. And that doesn't forgive bad cop behavior. But when you look at all of the variables, the decision tree that a cop has to go to and the things they have to deal with and the defund or the refund or the changing allocation of things, that's all great in a permissive environment. But you run into a hot family fight and you don't know until you're there. That's not a place for a social worker. That's a place for a guy who does jujitsu on the side and has a baton and has mace and has fantastic negotiation skills, because they go with all those tools and they're still not properly equipped to go deal with that. And unless you're a social worker that can roll with someone like if you can't physically put your body on someone else and shove them against the wall and say, you better calm the fuck down.
Yeah. Social workers are definitely not trained to go hands-on very often.
Yeah.
But
escalate and then de-escalate in an instant.
Yes, in an instant. And so these are things that have to be navigated all the time. So I get the argument to defund the police if what you mean is that you are taking away money for policing because you're reassigning those tasks to somebody else. Right. And that means that what a police officer will be required to do is go hands-on all the time, because now he's not going to the calls that, oh, the kitten's up a tree. You don't call the cops for that.
Yeah.
Because everybody defaults to, well, call the cops, dial 911. And sometimes it's a medical emergency, but anything short of that, it's like, who do you think is going to answer that call? Well, if we defund the police, we're going to have to fund another something else, arm of government, to do whatever the job is.
Yeah.
So I'm for it if that's what we're going to do with the funds that we defund. But I really like Andrew Yang's idea that every police officer should be a blue belt in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I think that's just a great idea.
I mean, that's the more training bucket, right? How do you develop that capacity? And also be way better at using your weapon. Like standing still, feet flat-footed, and shooting paper at 10 meters is not a good representation of how you use your weapon in a conflict.
In the field, yeah.
Right. So we know you can put rounds downrange and hit paper. We know that. All right. Can you have your heart elevated? Can you walk and shoot? Can you run and hide and have to take, can you shoot off the pavement purposely to disable somebody? Can you shoot around off a hood of a car to slow it down, but go into there's a lot of techniques that can be taught and trained. but that
But
costs
just
money.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't, because they don't got the time, the money. And by the way, every time someone goes into a training situation, someone gets hurt. You know, whether they get shot in the foot or they're doing jujitsu. And look, Jocko rolled with another guy one time and broke his neck on accident. Sorry, I broke your neck.
Yeah.
That's what a blue belt means. Snapped ligaments, broken arms,
uh,
all that shit
yeah,
will
a
happen.
blue belt means that things happen, but a blue belt isn't rolling with Jocko.
It means
You
you're
know.
rolling with another blue belt who's like, I put you in an arm bar, you didn't tap, and oops, sorry,
Yep.
I broke your arm.
That
will happen.
It will sometimes. It will. You know, my black belt is not in jiu-jitsu, but I've horsed around with a lot of jiu-jitsu. And the thing is, the more advanced you get, the better you get at playing around. And so, the accidents happen with the white belts more than they happen with the blue belts.
Sure.
Because by then, I got that trick tendon. I've done this 1,000 times. I've had my ass handed to me 1,000 times.
Yeah.
I know when that trick tendon, I'm tapping. And the other guy knows to look for it. Like, I know when we're rolling, I'm going to execute this maneuver. And once I get a hold of it, I'm going to be waiting for the tap. Because by the time you, by the way, learn a maneuver, you've probably had it done to you 1,000 times. So, hey, I know what it feels like when that triangle is on me. So when I put it on somebody, I'm going to be looking out for that. So, but that's the thing, is that the advantage to having all of your law enforcement officers achieve a rank of at least blue belt, which a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, by the way, casual listener, is very serious. So somebody is capable. I mean, the length of time it takes to get a blue belt in any of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu places that I know of is a matter of several years.
Yeah.
Nobody gets a blue belt in jiu-jitsu quickly. So by the time you're that level of proficiency, you're a black belt in anything else. So that's what we're talking about here. And if all of the cops were that, the guns would come out a lot less frequently.
Yeah.
And that's a different world, but that costs a lot of money.
Costs a lot of money
to train a guy to that level. It also weeds out a lot of dumbasses, because a lot of dumbasses don't have what it takes. They don't have the fortitude to get to that rank. And if they know that, hey, part of the job is you got to get to this rank, who's that going to disqualify? I say a lot of dumbasses.
We had Sid Hale on the show, legend in the LA County. Look, and if you're talking about high level departments, LA County is about as high as you can get, because they've got Alpine and beach and everything in between geographically.
Everything in between.
Mm-hmm. They got the hood and they got Hollywood and everything in between.
And everything in between, right.
So you never know what you're going to get. And he
Today,
said
you might have to arrest a hood rat. You might have to arrest a billionaire.
Yeah, Chris Brown might be going crazy in Brentwood, which has happened.
Yep. Right.
Requiring helicopters and all kinds of things. So it's one of the most complex police environments ever. And he said one of our problems is these young guys go through the academy and then they get put on evidence and they sit there for the 18 months through the probationary period. And then it's finally their turn to go on the street and they are alone on the street. We don't even know if they can handle the job.
Never been on the street.
Right. And now they're handling that job.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So
it is crazy.
We have to understand what it takes to send someone out in those environments. I mean, it's easy to say defund and police are bad and all that stuff, but the reality is and there are they're bad people, so of course there's bad cops, but there are 200 million police shifts every year.
Yep.
And at some point, goddamn, the police are pretty damn good when you look at it as a massive organization. How much money would
there are a lot of good people who take up that occupation.
And to improve it by 10%, can you even do that? Can you even make a department across the board that much better? And then, by the way, how do you measure that? And it's just, it's such a
those are the
big
questions.
thing.
So I would back you off of the question, can you do it? The answer is yes, you can do it. But the more complicated question is, how are you going to measure it? How are you going to chart your progress? What is the solution to this problem you've identified? And the problems are localized, so they're going to be a little different everywhere. But I think we've reached a time where, here's what I'll say, man. We have some problems in policing that have been growing over the years, that need to be solved. We also have some societal problems that make it harder and harder to do that job. And so we're talking about attracting good talent to want to do it. We're talking about restoring a sense of nobility to that occupation that would attract good talent. We're talking about compensation that makes it worth dedicating your life, because that's the thing, is that you dedicate your life to the job because part of it is, hey, I get to retire at 58 and I'll have a comfortable autumn of my life. So that's part of the payoff. And all of those things, go into compensation. So we need to pay these guys well. And the argument to say, let's take money away from them only works if you also reallocate that money so that you're able to attract better talent and keep that talent trained up so that they can do a better job at all the stuff that's prior to making the decision to shoot somebody.
Yeah. And reallocate, but we keep asking for more money of ourselves, I mean, look at the roads in your hometown. It's a $40 million problem and growing, and they can ask for more money. But at some point, like, hey, you guys have to deal with the money you got. That's libertarian to me. Like, what checks that monster?
Yeah. No, but that's the answer. That's the answer. Okay, how do we solve this problem within these parameters? You got parameters, man. You don't just get to just start writing checks.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Yeah. You don't get to have everything.
Everybody should understand what's going on in their community, and everybody should vote. So I'm going to request that everybody, hey, take a look at what's happening around you. Take a look at who you think ought to be solving those problems and vote for those people. And everybody should vote, and everybody should absolutely pay attention to how they're voting on a local level.
I'm going to push harder on that and say, fuck that. Don't just vote. Go get involved in your government. If you don't like how the police is doing something, go get involved.
Help fix it. Yeah.
Go get on the committee. Go see your police chief and say, what on earth can I do? I have hours to spend. If you actually care, act like it. And maybe it isn't police. Maybe you care about gophers. Maybe you care about whatever it is. But be that part of your community that does something, because voting is the end of the line. Hey, Measure C, yes, no. Prop 15, yes, no. All the work's already been done up to that point. You're just picking from the options that survive, which are often not the best options. I mean, as a guy that sat on a government committee, we were given things to decide on. And it's like, well, I wouldn't pick any of these things, but we got to pick one of them, because them's the rules. So we've got to be more involved.
We do have to be more involved, because that committee that you were on made decisions that cost a lot of money. And, like you said, they were decisions where you're like, I don't want any of these things to happen. Why don't we just not spend any of this money? And then somebody has to raise their hand and go, yeah, well, we're not going to get the money next year if we don't spend it this year. So yeah, there's a lot you can do locally that is impactful on your neighborhood. And there's a lot you can do locally that makes financial sense, or could be a financial catastrophe if you don't help.
And if you want to work on the policing problem, if that's what you're really passionate about, because that's sort of the crisis du jour right now, not to minimize what that is, but it's a crisis, and we have a lot of crises that need attention. I would ask you this. Is it more dangerous to be a black dude in Vallejo running around, or is it more dangerous to be a black dude in Vallejo who encounters a cop? I don't know the answer to that question, but there's people getting shot in Vallejo all the time. Like it's a regular occurrence that's happening. So this problem is not a universal problem or a univariate problem. This is a universal problem where, like, why is this community so hard on itself? And that's just Vallejo, whatever. Chicago, pick your crappy spot. Cleveland, there's there's plenty of places that have trouble.
There's a
And
big pile of
is it
problems to solve.
right? So if you just say, it's the police, I think I would suggest that you're underestimating what the problem is and underestimating the complexity of that police job. Go on a ride along and see what it's like to be a cop and reorient on that, and then try to work on the problem.
I had a really tough conversation last night with Daryl Anders, who's our dear friend, and that guy really means a lot to me. And hearing what he has to say as an artist, to me, is important because he has a way of articulating these emotions, and he is a Black man who was very vocal about all the things that that he encounters that are a reality for him, and he's the most kind, gentle human being you'd ever want to encounter. But he's sort of reached his wit's end because he really feels the threat every time he drives a car. And part of that threat is, man, I sure hope I don't get pulled over. But there's a lot more out there and he acknowledged that anybody at any time could decide that they don't like to see this Black guy driving around in a nice car for whatever they think the reason is. And it's a reality that has to do with a lot, like you said, it's a univariate problem. I just want to use that word. I'm gonna have to use that word 3 times in the next 24 hours so that I can claim it. But yeah, it's a conversation that was difficult. We posted the show last night. It's not my best work in terms of, hey, that sure went smoothly, because it was emotional, but it was sincere. And so when you say, like, wow, these guys are struggling to get through this topic, yeah, we were struggling. And at the time, he was being very candid. And I think that what it's going to take is for us to first be very candid about these conversations, continue to engage our friends, continue to try to listen to the emotions that people feel about these things, and not insert your objective. Because the biggest thing I see when I see people arguing on Facebook is somebody's got to, check your motive, everybody. Check your motive. Is your motive to be right in an argument? Because the reason why we're able to discuss all of these things, Pete, is I know that deep down inside you're trying to learn something, and you may have an opinion about something, but I know that if I bring you relevant facts, and if I bring you an argument that is, rooted in justice, that you can change your mind.
Yeah.
And
vice
if
versa.
those factors do not exist, then arguing is pointless. We're just going to continue to accelerate in volume until we're pissed off at each other, which I'm happy to say just hasn't happened and doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm always looking
if we
for,
disagree about,
I'm always looking for like the nexus of this problem. What is creating this outcome? I mean, if there are problems within this problem that indicate that, like, okay, we're not at the root here. And from what I've figured out thus far, this is not a race-based problem. This is not because there are Black and white people. It's about a cultural problem. And I don't know much beyond that. But when someone says Black Lives Matter, and you say, well, all lives matter, and all lives matter becomes a problem, now we're talking about something else. When we say Black Lives Matter, and you say, well, what about Chicago? Black people shooting. The number one demo for being murdered and having them go unsolved is Black dudes. That's not what I want. It's not what you want. But it's Black dudes killing Black dudes. So, and this isn't meant to be a racial point in the finger. It's like that is the reality we're dealing with. So, if Black
but
lives
that is
do
a
matter,
reality.
right? But it is the driving reality, I think, in this case. So if that is the case, how do we deal with this problem? How do we reduce violence?
Well, there's the separator. That's the separator. If you think that's the driving reality, that is a very harsh reality. But to discount a person's feelings when they are someone who doesn't live in Chicago, they live somewhere else.
Yeah.
And by virtue of being Black, they feel more endangered every day, all the time, than other people get to feel, which, you know, in my view, is valid. I don't live in Chicago.
Yeah.
I think, based on upbringing and culture and my taste in things, I am practically steeping in the Black experience. I love funk music. I grew up in the dawn of hip hop. I had fat laces. I was raised in a neighborhood where, aside from my mom, I had Olivia Rice and Fairly Gomez, two Black women who helped raise me. Fairly Gomez not only raised our generation, but Kelvin and I had kids the same age. She raised them too.
Yep.
So I bring this point up because I believe that I have a very close relationship to the Black experience, except that I've never been Black.
Yeah.
And so I can say, well, yeah, I know a lot about the experiences that Black people face, except for being Black. So to me, that's like, hey, I can acknowledge the things that go on, but I'll never know what it's like to be pulled over by a cop and be Black. That I will never know. So as much as I can roll down the window and say, hello, officer, I love hip hop and I love,
Fat
all the
laces.
things that are Black culture. I love fat laces. He's not going to treat me the same way as he's going to treat a person when he sees the window rolled down and there's a Black man sitting in the driver's seat. So the issue here is not do Black lives matter, because there's a syndrome going on in Chicago that is absolutely unignorable. The reality is, or what I was always told in trainings for human resources stuff like sexual harassment, perception is reality. If there's a person in your office who thinks you sexually harassed them, it is your obligation to make that not be so. So if a woman raises her hand and says, man, I don't like the way that you treat me and the way you look at me when I walk in, and you look me up and down and you say my skirt sure looks nice, how come you never compliment the quality of my work? You just compliment the outfit I'm wearing. That is a problem for me, not for her, to solve. So when the Black Lives Matter sentiment is simply to say, we would just like acknowledgement, we being, again, a person that is not necessarily living in Chicago. Do we discount, just because Chicago exists in the terrible circumstance that it's in, do we discount a person who lives in, another city where that's just not the case, but they get treated differently because they're Black? Because right now, there are a lot of people who do not feel like their life matters as much. So my job as a person who's not Black is to stand up and say, you know what? Black lives matter. They absolutely matter. Does saying broccoli is a vegetable mean that other vegetables are any less of a vegetable? No. When I say that Black lives matter, do I mean that white lives do not matter? No. I am just acknowledging that a certain segment of the population right now feels in their heart that their life does not matter as much as other people, and there's empirical evidence that would persuade them to feel that way. And so, does it hurt so bad just to say, yes, let's start by saying that Black lives do matter? And if we can all matter without saying, well, you just said redheads' lives matter, what does that say about Guamanians? It doesn't say anything about Guamanians. All we've said is a thing in the plus column, and it's not a negative sum game. Because we say Black lives matter doesn't mean that other lives do not or matter less. But there's a
Unless you
hurting
say all
population
lives
right
matter,
now.
and then we have, this is where the problem comes in. When you say, but all lives matter,
But who says all lives matter? And this is just like the Chicago argument. When people say all lives matter, what many people who say that is, stop saying that Black lives matter.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying all lives matter.
I know you're not.
And here's the thing: is like the Chicago thing is important. It is an example. If we really care about Black lives, and I think we should, because Black males are paying a disproportionate part of this cost. They are the most likely people to be killed violently. Let's act like it. Let's work on these things. And then what do we do here on the show? Like we'll have Sid Hale describe the police existence, his reality. We're also going to have Daryl on, and Chris Thomas King just wrote a whole album about the experience. So we have to look at these conversations to understand where we're at. But we as a community have responsibilities, and the Black community has a responsibility. You know, when we look at like that social media movie, that horror show, and how we're influenced by what we see purposefully, you know, and how that can set our mind on a certain thing. All of these things create this cultural problem that we have. So if we can get better input, if we can look at the empirical data and we can understand where the problems are, we can start to put energy in where we can make the biggest difference. I mean, we really can do that. We have the ability to measure these things. But if we can't get past race, and if we can't get past all lives or Black lives, let's just say that I'd love to see less violence. And let's be honest about all of this stuff. It's not wealthy people getting shot by cops. It's a class problem, if anything. So poor people lives matter. You know, we can look at where the problem is. And it's like when we could talk about Breonna Taylor, who was the other person? Who was the next person? Who was the person before that? Like, let's not just focus on race. Let's focus on this problem of, you know, what does it mean to have use of force go against you as a person? And if there's a pattern, let's work on that pattern. But if we get hung up on whose life matters, let's just start by saying we have a problem with violence in the police, you know, or how people are treated or how they're perceived about how they're treated. And then you get these multivariate problems and you realize, okay, this is not going to be as simple as saying defund the police or whatever it is. If we focus on race, it's so emotionally charged, it rots out the logic, it rots out the science, it rots those things out of what the problem is. If we start with race, you can always bring race in. If you start there, you don't get anywhere. You don't get to solve the problem because you're just looking at one aspect of it. Go tell that person in Appalachia who gets pulled over, you know, and because he's driving the kind of car that you can't drive there if you're not a drug dealer, whatever it is, that their life is matter. I mean, there's all kinds of problems that we look at, and predominantly it's folks that don't have enough resources. And so they do things that are extra legal, illegal, whatever it is, and they're in a situation where they encounter cops more, or they get targeted because they drive the same kind of car, wear the same kind of clothes. But if we start at race, it becomes a problem of trying to figure out a problem that race will get over amplified in terms of how we deal with these things. And it's not easy. I'm not saying I'm 100% right. I just know that if you start with race, you instantly get charged and the logic and the reason leave the room in favor of emotion.
Who gets charged if you say Black Lives Matter?
I mean, that's the beginning of the conversation. So when you
Yeah.
say that, okay, and then you say, yeah, but all lives matter. Like, I don't like violence. I don't want,
Okay.
police harming people.
Who? I mean, that's my question to you is who gets charged when you say Black Lives Matter? I say this sincerely because I have a lot of Black people in my life. Their
Yeah.
lives matter to me. And for 400 years in our country, Black lives have mattered less than other lives. Now, are there other categories of people who fit in that segment? You know, Irish people's lives didn't matter in New York for a long, long time. There are Italian people's lives didn't matter in New York for a long, long time. There are a lot of, we could go through, Native American lives didn't matter. And I will acknowledge all of those people. All I'm saying is that right now, I'm going to acknowledge that Black lives absolutely matter. Now, what I'm saying is now let's start the conversation. I've made that statement. I'm not afraid to make that statement and then start the conversation because we had 400 years where they mattered a lot less. So that's all. I just want to answer that particular concern that's felt by a lot of people that I personally know and love and say that also is a concern that we're going to address as we look at all of these problems. And again, there's no life that I'm saying matters less, but I am simply acknowledging that for a long time, Black lives have not mattered the same. They have not. And that's bad. And for us to fix our society, Let us acknowledge that. And then what else must we acknowledge? Because I'm willing to acknowledge it all. Native American lives did not matter as much for a very long time. Let us also fix that problem. I'm not afraid to say and proclaim and feel these things. So,
But but you can't be exclusive when you say it, right? So
I'm not being exclusive.
I shouldn't say you. We
I'm
as a
being
group,
inclusive.
right? But if you say, "But all lives matter to me," I want to fix this problem for anybody who's suffering or going through injustice or can't create generational wealth. That is not a negative thing, and it's looking at the problem in a way that gives you chances to look at something else. If you start to divide people up by how people perceive them or how they perceive themselves, you will only create division. You can't put intolerance into a system and expect something tolerant to come out.
I don't have anything to say back to that. I'm not going to be part of the problem of the rest of it. I'm not going to be an obstacle to the problem. I'm just acknowledging that there's a segment of our population that has a feeling that is absolutely justified. And I am answering that feeling by committing to be an ally to solving the problem.
Yeah.
And what I'm not going to do is say, well, that's an unjustifiable feeling. I am going to absolutely refuse to acknowledge that.
But I don't think people are saying that it's
No,
unjustifiable.
they're saying that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think
that's the
that's
feeling. It's like sexual harassment. You
Yeah.
can say, yeah, I look you up and down when you walk in. You're a nice looking lady, but I'm not sexually harassing you. If she says, I feel sexually harassed,
Yeah.
that's the litmus. The litmus is, does the recipient feel that sentiment? And if the recipient feels that sentiment, okay, I'm going to stop looking at you like that. I am absolutely going to address you as a professional. I'm going to do whatever it takes so that you do not feel sexually harassed. My burden.
Yeah.
And then what else do we need to do at work? We're going to do all those things that we need to do at work. But I'm not going to say, well, I didn't mean it that way, so I'm going to keep looking you up and down, even though you feel like I'm looking you up and down. I'm not. I'm just going to keep
There's a
doing
lot
that
of assumption in that, though. And one of the things we've learned from doing the show is that, like, a hard question is, well, what does the Black community owe itself to deal with this problem? And it's really hard to get an answer out of that makes sense, because they can't speak openly about what they owe themselves. Now, you get some people, Bob Woodson will do it all day long. He's an old wise dude who's like, here's where our problems lie. But we don't like that conversation. So look, I get what you're saying. We all have bias.
I'm trying to
We
get
all
us
have,
to a place where we have that conversation. And you're saying, well, there's resistance. Well, the reason for the resistance is because we fail to acknowledge that for 400 years, Black lives have mattered less than other lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, if that's where the conversation starts, I think it creates problems for getting to somewhere positive, because it eliminates a lot of things that are vital to
Well,
the
it
conversation.
eliminates accountability for the fact that a segment of the population feels that way. So it's like saying, I don't care if you feel that way. We have to solve this problem. I don't understand what it costs to just acknowledge that feeling and say, yes, let's solve it together. Yes, your life matters. It seems like there's a cost to that.
Because if it was that simple, it'd be over. But it's not that simple. It's not as simple.
Well, we don't know that it's going to be. We don't know that it's that simple because we won't acknowledge it as a society. That's what's the problem.
We have ways to look at these things in terms of science that understand what these problems look like, right? And I'm not saying that the black condition is different. I'm not saying that it's not different, that they don't get discriminated against. I think that does happen. But
right, you're saying that sentiment doesn't matter.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
You're saying, hey, people who have that sentiment, get over it.
No.
In order for us to solve this problem, you have to get over it.
No, that's unfair. That's not what I'm saying at all. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay. Honestly, Pete, that's what I'm hearing.
Well, then try to hear something else, because that's not what I'm saying. This is my point about we can have an academic on the show, who will talk about the societal problems from an academic point of view, and then you have Chris Thomas King or Daryl come on the show, and you have to accept both realities. I accept both realities. What I'm saying is, when you bring race into a complex social problem, it starts to eat away at the logic, because
Well,
we
you
lose
don't bring it
track.
in. It's already there.
Is it?
It exists. The problem
Is it?
exists. Yes.
Okay.
Just like the sexual harassment problem exists.
So what do we do about the class problem of people that don't have enough,
We
that get treated
we
differently
first
by the
say
police?
we first say Black Lives Matter. Who else's life needs to matter?
All lives.
Who else in that class? Who else in that class needs to matter?
All lives.
No, not all. Who else in that class needs to matter?
Yeah,
Name
all
one
lives.
segment of people.
All lives.
Name one
Anybody
segment.
who's dominated in a way that
name one. Go ahead and name one. Any of them. Name one.
the next most likely group, and it's on par in terms of like when you look at per capita, Native Americans. They get
Native
shot and killed.
American lives absolutely spectacularly
All right.
matter.
All right.
This is what I'm talking about. It's just an acknowledgement to say, okay, let us take it into consideration that there is a feeling.
But it's
Because
not a
if we
lack of acknowledgement to say they all matter.
No,
we
it is.
have these problems.
It's a lack of acknowledgement to fail to say, you matter. You matter.
Yeah.
Okay, we all matter. You and I know that the reality is that because I know you, I know in your heart, everyone matters. But what I'm saying is that the answer is not to just raise your hand and say, let us just discount this feeling and let us say that everyone matters. Instead, let's say, who needs mattering?
Yeah.
Native Americans need mattering? Yes, let's address that problem.
Yeah.
And simply acknowledge we're going to address your problem. Now, there are a lot of, that are a lot of people in the impoverished groups of all kinds of, genders and everything else. All I'm saying is, what does it cost us to say, you matter? You matter to whoever it is. And then this is how we include. Because when somebody says, I feel excluded, and you say, well, everybody feels excluded, does that make them feel any more included? I think the answer is to first say, okay, yes, let us include you. Let us include you. You absolutely matter. Let's figure out how we can display that you matter as much as everybody else. And then somebody else raises their hand and go, well, I need to matter. Hey, shit, it turns out you do.
Yeah.
When you go to the official Black Lives Matter, okay, I get that, Brad. There is somebody out there has a website. They own a URL called Black Lives Matter, and they put a bunch of bullshit on there. And I'll acknowledge there's a bunch of bullshit on there. Does that matter that there's a person who lives next door to you or wherever who happens to be a insert whatever, who feels like they don't matter? That's all I'm saying, is that there are individuals out there who feel this. And, I don't want to be on the side of history that fails to acknowledge that a group feels marginalized.
But you don't get to pick your side of history. You just have to act down where you need to act. And again, this goes back to this whole thing. If we actually care, we have to act like it. We have to take action in the way that allows us, fuck history. That's not for us to decide. How do we move forward?
I know, but when history does get decided, I want to say that I acted in my conscience, and my conscience says there are individuals who feel a certain way. I don't want them to feel like that.
Yeah,
that's all.
I mean, I don't know what to do about someone feeling a certain way. I can't change that, and
I can.
You can't. Okay, I don't know.
You can.
I don't know.
You can, because you do it all the time. Everybody you interact with, you change their feeling about something.
Yeah.
You influence. You're an influencer.
But I can't pick a specific thing. Yes, I create affects and I create emotional responses for sure. And hopefully I do a good job of that. I also do a shitty job sometimes too. But again, like if we start with a racial premise, we start to lose track of what the problem is and how we deal with it. What steps would it take to make someone who's Black feel like their lives matter? I mean, maybe, okay, so let's say Hey, your life matters.
You know what?
It really does.
I don't know, but I'm gonna find out.
Yeah, good,
I'm gonna find out.
good. Yeah,
You know, I'm not gonna ignore it. I'm gonna find out.
but I don't think people are ignoring it. I'm certainly not ignoring it. You know, I'm exploring the whole complicated mess. You know, I want to
Okay.
understand. Yeah.
I do absolutely believe that you're sincere about that, Pete. I absolutely know you're sincere about that. But there are a lot of people out there who are saying all lives matter so that they can avoid it.
I mean, the same in the reverse is true for Black Lives Matter folks. There's a whole lot of people saying that to push a racial narrative that doesn't need to be there. I mean, that's people. That's just a people problem.
Yeah. So
When we undermine people because of their race, when we do prejudicial racist shit, like do white supremacy or black
the things that
supremacy,
happen
or
all the
ignore
time.
the
Yeah.
fact that there are
Mhm.
billions of Asians. I mean, from Yemen to Timor-Leste, there are a lot of Asians, and we never talk about that shit. You know, we just lump them all together and we ignore it. But we got a lot of folks that matter, but we have to act like it. I mean, if we care, and it's okay to say, I don't got time for that. I care about the whales. Whales matter to me. That's all I got time for. You guys sort your own thing out. We all get to do that here. But I don't think it leads to a path if we focus on race as the first problem. Let's deal with it. Why do these communities, whatever it is, and it's usually again low income communities, why do they struggle more? It's not what I want. When Shaka Senghor says prison is an extension of our community, that is not at all what I want. How do we deal with that problem?
Yeah. I don't know.
And that's not a black problem. That is a problem of, you know, urban streets, not enough money and all those things. Anyhow, lots of comments, by the way, from Sam and from Todd and from Brad. And at least we get to have these conversations.
You know what? I love what this is what happens when crazies start making the rules. Smart people matter. That's absolutely true. And you know, I don't know. I think
The other
one of
day
the
we had
things is
Abigail
that,
Schreier on, and she talked about trans girls going from young girls to boy, and the problems in that, the system and how it works, and how outside influences can take your rights as a parent away from you. We've had this whole conversation, and it makes the trans crowd crazy. It just drives them absolutely bonkers. The thing is I'm working right now on trying to get a trans person to come on to tell the other side of the story, because, you know, that's what we do here. We try to give opportunities for them to talk. I can't tell a trans person how to feel. I can't change how they feel about their gender, their dysmorphia, or whatever it is, their genetic proclivity towards feeling in a certain way. But I can, you can, we can illustrate what these things look like from both sides, so we can all have a little more understanding and a little more empathy. You know, again, I'll say it over and over again. I don't want anybody to experience violence from the government. I don't want anybody to be in a spot where they have to pick between bad and worse. You and I have been as broke as we can be. We talk about the poor people tax all the time. You know, it costs more money to be poor. You get into trouble, you can't just solve your problem with $200 because there's not $200 there. I don't know how to fix those problems, but I definitely feel that pain. I know that pain, and I'm on everybody's side. That's why we're going to have Chris on the show and talk about what he felt. That's why I had that Bianchi, that actor, who did his whole performance of his George Floyd poem, because we all can take it. We all can have these conversations. And that's all I want to say. And of course, for anybody watching, John and I are having a good conversation. We're not mad at each other in any way at
yeah,
all.
no, we're
This is how we work.
absolutely the least. This is for sure. This is how we work things out. But the thing is, we are able to do this because I know who you are in your heart, man. And the
likewise.
viewpoint that you express is one that is absolutely as you express it and as you act on it. It's absolutely valid. It is the solution. The only difference between your approach and my approach is that I start with Black lives do matter, Chinese lives matter, Native American lives matter. You know, everybody who's experienced something in their path that needs to be acknowledged. they do matter. And so this is why we want to solve the problem. And your mathematical solution to the problem is a little more like, hey, okay, well, let us instead approach this problem as a, set of circumstances that need to be solved and solve for X. And it's a mathematical solution. And I know you're sincere about it. So that's where we are, everybody. The only challenge that I will say for everybody else out there is just think about it and talk to your neighbors about it and have these kind of conversations and be willing to say, hey, man, okay, I'm going to do my best to see things the way that you see them. And I'm going to see the sincerity in your heart. And I'm going to see the sincerity in your actions. And I'm going to know that in spite of the fact that we may have two different approaches, that you are my ally. And hopefully we can get somewhere.
And I'll say this about all of this stuff. These really are cultural problems. If we understand how each other make decisions and what our goals are, we'll be able to collaborate together a lot more. You and I have the same goal. Me and Chris Thomas King have the same goal. How we go about it, how we decide it, as you were saying, if we can tolerate that, we can get
this
there.
thing that Todd just put up too. It's a valid point. That's the thing, man, is that we all have these individual experiences in our lives. And right now, we're having this conversation the way that we're having it, but there's also a climate at this moment that makes it okay to be an absolute asshole. And what I'm trying not to be in conversations with you and other people is an absolute asshole. And I know that you always avoid the assholic path as well. But there are a lot of people who carry an asshole card, and right now it's kind of okay to carry an asshole card.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do about that. But I'm sure, Todd, if you had a conversation with Kelly, I'm not quite sure what Kelly's point is exactly, but I'd love to find out. Why that experience is influenced that way, and what on earth she means by that. I mean, Brad and I have had some interesting exchanges too. And I know that, he's coming from a good place, and I'm very fortunate in my life to know a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and everybody has an experience.
Yeah.
So, if we can get to know each other's experiences, we're going to get there. So, but I'm going to start off by, deferring to the position that addresses the sentiment for each and every group of people that feels disenfranchised, and then we'll attack the problem. And you start off from the other side of the problem and attack the problem, and hopefully we'll meet in the middle and the problem gets solved.
And if not, we'll have a lot of shows talking about it, and we'll all be forced to be uncomfortable. Because if you can stand being uncomfortable, you can get down the path.
That's right.
Because this shit is not going to feel good to solve it. No way.
It's not. No, there's no way that it's going to feel good. It's going to always be emotional. Hey, we've been on for almost an hour and a half, man.
And it's hot as fuck in this tent right now.
It is. It's hot as balls in this car, too.
All right. I'm gonna stop this recording. Stand by.
Let's get out of here.